Hi there, I'm Chris Crowell, editor-in-chief of Solar Builder magazine. In the Q4 issue of Solar Builder, I wrote a piece looking at the unintended consequences of the domestic content tax credit adder as it applies to small-scale solar systems. Now, full disclosure, I started this article before the election. Oh, what a time that was. But now we all expect the Trump administration and a Republican Congress to cut, alter, destroy some aspects of the IRA and ITC. And one scenario in the rumor mill is the domestic content adder turning into a mandatory requirement to even earn the base level 30% ITC. So that's speculation at this point in time. But point being, this guidance is subject to change and possibly could influence the market even more than this current assessment I'm about to go through. The Q4 issue of Solar Builder is brought to you by Generac. The domestic content tax credit adder and the Inflation Reduction Act received a lot of love from all sides of the solar industry. And why not? It's an extra 10% tax credit just for sourcing a percentage of the system from the United States. It's a nudge of support for U.S. solar supply chains, which is a nice political message, jobs, and a nice environmental message. Reduced emissions. To qualify for the domestic content tax credit adder for either the ITC or PTC, the PV system must satisfy this adjusted percentage rule, or APR, using this equation. I'll read this, but I don't know if it'll make sense unless you look at it. But the domestic cost percentage, equals U.S. manufactured product costs plus the U.S. manufactured components costs divided by total manufactured product costs. So essentially, if not all the components of this product are sourced from the United States, then you must kind of line item parts of it that are, and only those parts will qualify for that overall percentage. If it's 100% sourced US product in this equation, you kind of get an extra benefit of being able to total the production costs as well. Now, at the end of all that, when you look at the modules, the racking, the inverters, that adjusted percentage threshold to achieve the domestic content tax credit adder is 40% in 2024. And it steps up 5% each year until it reaches 55% in 2027. Now, the law only specified the 5% annual escalation for the PTC, not the ITC. But our sources say that was an oversight, and most assume it will be revised so that the 5% escalation applies to the ITC as well. So I'll be using that as my assumption going forward. Now, the domestic content adder, like much of the IRA, in my opinion, was conceived more with larger scale solar projects and big business in mind, because the DC adder is only available to commercial tax entities, which means a homeowner cannot earn the tax credit when buying a system via cash or loan. The DC adder is only available in residential solar via third-party ownership financing. For megawatt scale projects, hitting that 40 to 45% domestic content percentage in 2024 or 2025 is only possible by including some amount of solar modules made in the United States, which was really the spirit of this thing from the beginning, building the US solar module market. Smaller scale solar projects, on the other hand, can achieve the domestic content percentage without US-made modules with the right combination of inverters and racking. So when calculating the domestic content adder, on May 24th, Treasury issued guidance that included this new elective safe harbor table. It's a simpler path to calculating the minimum portion of domestic content required without the need for the direct cost information from suppliers, those line item percentages. The method uses a table with weights for applicable project components and manufactured project components. If you see any manufacturer touting their domestic content percentage, they're likely using this table. Now, it helps to actually crack open your Q4 issue of Solar Builder magazine to kind of see the table in front of you. But I am only looking at the rooftop MLPE and rooftop string inverter columns, because you'll notice stark differences in the percentages possible between the two. Safe Harbor table assigns more value to module level power electronics than string inverters. The combination of either MLPE or string inverter plus racking will get a project over the threshold of 40% in 2024. But assuming inverter and racking manufactured product components in the United States, MLPE without a domestic module could get to 61.4%, which means an MLPE-based design with racking without a domestic module would qualify for that 10% DC adder for the duration of the IRA. String inverters without a US module will only get to 44.6%, which means string inverter-based design without sourcing a US module will already likely not be able to hit the adjusted percentage when it steps up to 45% in 2025. Joe Shangra, research associate at Wood Mackenzie, agrees with my assessment that the tables favor MLPE as string inverters only get a fraction of the total project value. Need to say, however, racking has a higher weight in the string inverter scenario, which is true, meaning 40 to 45% is still obtainable if you get a couple percentage points from domestic module components. So agreed, but the fact that there is that discrepancy is just strange to me. Solar plus storage projects are another story. The new elective safe harbor table treats solar plus storage as one project with another kind of crazy equation that you'll want to look at. But I'll skip over that part to say that Philip Shen, analyst with investment for Roth Capital, sees a pathway to meet the 40% threshold by combining MLPE with racking and select battery pack components without the need for US modules and cells versus string-based solar plus storage projects in residential. Shen sees a path without domestic cell and modules here too. However, quote, it requires fully domestic racking or a domestic battery pack cell. And there, assuming fully domestic racking, we see an adjusted percentage of 40.6% for a rooftop string inverter project. These safe harbor table scenarios just gave me flashbacks to the introduction of rapid shutdown in the National Electric Code. That code change had a dramatic impact on the PV inverter marketplace because installers essentially had to design systems with either microinverters or an optimizer-based solution. And it's not like these are bad products, but it just shrunk the field of options from a field of brands to just 2 or 3. And the DC adder is not code, obviously. And solar installers are free to ignore all this, and choose any system components to best meet their project's expectations, industry best practices, and what have you. But the siren song of this 10% tax credit is definitely having a material influence on product selection and in residential solar financing. And it's something we need to be thinking about. And just how much it's having an influence comes into focus when you consider the US solar inverter market. Because regardless of the safe harbor table calculations and whether it favors one or another, there's only a few inverter companies with US manufacturing to begin with. Wood Mackenzie began covering PV inverter manufacturing capacity earlier in 2024 and currently sees around 8 to 9 gigawatts operating in the US, led by a mix of residential and utility scale inverter OEMs such as SolarEdge, Enphase, Siemens, and TMEIC. And they see that capacity could surpass 40 gigawatts by 2027 with some announcements from Power Electronics, that's 20 gigawatts, SMA with 3.5, and TMEIC with another 9. But a large chunk of that is coming from central inverters as well. The other thing Shangra notes is, quote, most factories still do not source 100% of electronic components from the US, meaning that they cannot capture the production component of the US domestic content tax credit adder. That's a key point. Most currently have US-made printed circuit boards, giving them about half the possible points. But for MLPE, this is enough to capture the 40% when paired with racking, but it won't be enough when it jumps to 45% in 2025. But now SolarEdge and Enphase both claim they'll have 100% US-made inverters ready by early 2025, if they don't already, which would earn the full 36% available for MLPE. To clarify, Tesla's inverter will not qualify as MLPE, is a string inverter. And remember, these US factories are all eligible for 45X production tax credits, which is an incentive to manufacture in the United States. So they get that, carrot as well. Now, racking companies in the DG space have certainly noticed the influence domestic racking has in achieving the adder and are heeding the call by securing US manufacturing if they didn't already have it. Some examples. S5 says that the railless system for metal roofs qualifies for the 37% domestic content for rooftop PV systems with string because the extended shelf on the top, the clamp functions as a rail, according to them. Unirac is also touting its solar mount racking systems, which can contribute up to 25.8%, and its US manufactured NXT solar mount and solar mount light rails can contribute 8.6% to get you over the 40% threshold when using a fully domestic microinverter. So there's all sorts of little machinations, and you got to really kind of make sure that you're choosing the right SKU and it's for the right pathway, MLPE, string, etc. But the bigger impact might be with TPOs. The DC adder is only available to commercial tax entities, which means a homeowner cannot earn the tax credit when buying a system via cash or loan. The DC adder is only available in residential via third-party ownership, which is in part influencing a shift to leases in residential solar. TPO already comprised a significant portion of the residential market in 2023 and 2024, due largely to higher interest rates. Zoe Gaston, principal analyst for U.S. distributed solar for Wood Mackenzie, puts it like this. The TPO share was 20% in 2022, and it's ticked up to 38% in Q2 of 2024, the segment's highest quarterly market share since 2017. And Gaston says they expect the TPO segment to continue gaining momentum over the next few years, reaching over 40% market share in 2026. Now, the domestic content adder certainly adds to that appeal for lease providers. Quote, generally, the availability of the ITC adders is a significant reason for the shift to TPO, Gaston says. Recently, multiple lenders have even launched their own TPO products. Now, given the high profile, this is me talking again, given the high profile residential solar bankruptcies in 2024, the 10% adder is potentially a crucial source of cash for larger players. Many of the big financial providers are public, and they are under a lot of pressure and carry a lot of debt. They like the domestic tax credit adder because it stabilizes their business on this solar coaster ride we're all on and helps pay down that corporate debt. Quote from Gaston, some TPO providers are now mandate that their dealer partners can only originate lease and PPA customers that qualify for the DC adder. Okay, so now we're really getting into the impact here. Again, thinking back to what even qualifies for DC in the first place. The biggest signal to that effect, on September 1st, Sonova sent a note to dealers mandating that all systems must qualify for the domestic content adder. And residential solar players have had a rough go over the last 2 years. Larger players like SunPower, Lumio, Titan Solar all filed for bankruptcy in 2024. So any sort of profitability win is welcome, no doubt. And more TPO providers are emerging too, to open up the market to a wider variety of solar installation businesses who now maybe need to offer leases to compete in the market. Everbright, Palmetto's Lightreach, Posigen, and GoodLeap are a couple to name. But one of my main questions here is, are there any customer or installer benefits as we start to drill down into this? If that 10% DC adder is pursued and earned, does the solar installer or end customer benefit in any way? Well, it depends on the TPO provider. Some fintechs retain that benefit and do not factor it into the lease rate or the contractor's margin. Others might factor that 10% into a lower payment to ensure competitive advantage. Otherwise, the choice of domestic lease versus a non-domestic lease won't be clear enough to differentiate, and it won't drive much volume. The net pass-through benefit to the system user, according to David Dunlap, VP of Product Strategy at Baywa RE, might be nothing, or it might be only a few pennies per watt on the selling price or lease monthly rate of the system. Now, TPO rates pre-election and how providers monetize the tax credits could be different now given the uncertainty of the Trump administration. One lender source actually requested to be removed from this article completely because of that uncertainty. The other irony here is that procuring a system to earn the domestic content adder can end up costing more in dollar per watt because many of these made in the USA products, even after receiving the 45X manufacturing production tax credits for themselves, those products come with premium pricing. According to Philip Shen with Roth Capital in an industry note, their checks suggest premium pricing for domestic content is at least 10% for inverters, storage, and rail, which would equate to roughly 15 to 20 cents per watt for both inverters and storage. And lastly, for the end customer, solar systems financed as a TPO do not add to their home value as it does when solar is purchased by a loan. And you can read more about that in the Q4 issue as well if you're unaware of that fact. So my final 2 cents per kilowatt here. The focus on domestic content in the IRA is definitely working. It is encouraging more domestic manufacturing despite challenges to costs and global competitiveness. But the safe harbor table, perhaps unintentionally, skews in favor of a handful of certain brands at the end of the day. And keeping the benefits siloed for commercial entities also unnecessarily tilts the marketplace in residential and C&I solar away from loans and towards, again, certain brands. So back to my rapid shutdown analogy, ripple effects of rapid shutdown went beyond brand market share, and they were not fully understood until years later. More MLPE and C&I solar has led to the multiplication of PV connectors on rooftops, which is a common failure point. And we've reported multiple times from QA and QC firms noting an increased number of workmanship errors, such as cross-mating, poor crimps, as well as the over-reliance on rapid shutdown devices that were not ready for prime time just to meet code. And it led to urgent safety issues and still does. Now, again, the DC tax credit adder is not code. No one's making you do it, but it is having a somewhat arbitrary influence on PV system procurement, which is what I'm calling into question. It is narrowing solar installer choice without any consideration of installation best practices or end customer benefits. Manufacturing solar products in the United States and buying American is beneficial for the long-term health of the solar industry for sure. Just don't lose sight of customer benefits on the way to that nearby factory. I encourage all of you to hopefully go and read the rest of the Q4 issue of Solar Builder. It is our Projects of the Year issue. Lots of cool case studies, lots of cool insight, much, much more. Thanks for reading. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.